Four Noble Truths. 1. Introduction. The teaching of the Four Noble Truths encompasses the Buddhist teachings in their entirety. The entire subject matter discussed in Buddha Dharma is encapsulated in the Four Noble Truths, and therefore this teaching acts as the summary and conclusion to this book. There are some important points to understand in reference to the Four Noble Truths. 2. Role and significance of the Four Noble Truths. Friends, just as the footprint of any animal that walks can be placed within an elephant's footprint, and so the elephant's footprint is declared the chief of them because of its great size, so too all wholesome states can be included in the Four Noble Truths. So long, monks, as my knowledge and vision of these Four Noble Truths as they really are in their 3 phases and 12 aspects was not thoroughly purified in this way, I did not claim to have awakened to the unsurpassed perfect enlightenment. Monks, it is through not understanding, not penetrating the Four Noble Truths that I, as well as you, have for a long time run on and wandered round the cycle of birth and death. Then the Blessed One gave the householder Upali a gradual instruction, that is, talk on giving, talk on virtue, talk on the heavens. He explained the danger, degradation and defilement in sensual pleasures, and the blessing of renunciation. When he knew that the householder Upali's mind was ready, receptive, free from hindrances, lighted and confident, he expounded to him the teaching special to the Buddhas: suffering, its origin, its cessation, and the path. A person lives the holy life under the Blessed One in order to know, to see, to realize, to experience for himself, to attain that which is not yet known, seen, realized, experienced, and attained. That is, this is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the end of suffering, this is the path leading to the end of suffering. One of the unique characteristics of Buddhism is that it only teaches those truths which can be applied to benefit one's life. The Four Noble Truths are of direct benefit to people's lives. Buddhism does not concern itself with abstract truths that have no practical value. For this reason, the Buddha did not concern himself and waste time with metaphysical debates. If anyone should say thus, I will not lead the holy life under the Blessed One until the Blessed One declares to me the world is eternal or not eternal, the world is finite or the world is infinite, the life principle and the body are the same, or the life principle is one thing and the body another. A being exists after death or does not exist. A being both exists and does not exist after death, or a being neither exists nor does not exist after death. That would still remain undeclared by the Tathagata, and meanwhile that person would die. Suppose a man were wounded by an arrow thickly smeared with poison, and his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives brought a skilled surgeon to treat him. The man would say, I will not let the surgeon pull out this arrow until I know whether the man who wounded me was a noble or a Brahmin, or a merchant, or a labourer, until I know the name and clan of the man who wounded me, whether he was tall or short, or of middling height, whether he was dark, fair-skinned, or swarthy, and whether he lives in such a village or town or city. I will not let the surgeon pull out this arrow until I know whether the bow that wounded me was a longbow or a crossbow, whether the bowstring that wounded me was made with fibre or bamboo or sinew or hemp or bark, whether the shaft that wounded me was wild or cultivated, until I know with what kind of feathers the shaft that wounded me was fitted, whether those of a vulture or an adjundant stork, or a hawk, or a peacock, or a Sitilahanu bird, until I know with what kind of sinew the shaft that wounded me was bound, whether that of an ox, or a buffalo, or a langur, or a monkey, until I know what kind of arrowhead it was that wounded me. Before being able to know all of this, that man would surely die. So too, if anyone should say thus, I will not lead the holy life, meanwhile that person would die. Malunkya Putta, if there is the view the world is eternal, the holy life cannot be lived, and if there is the view the world is not eternal, the holy life cannot be lived. Whether there is the view the world is eternal, or the view the world is not eternal, there is still birth, there is still aging, there is still death, there are still sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. It is the destruction of these forms of suffering I prescribe here and now. Therefore remember what I have left undeclared as undeclared, and remember what I have declared as declared. And what have I left undeclared? The world is eternal, the world is not eternal. Why have I left that undeclared? Because it is unbeneficial, it does not belong to the fundamentals of the holy life. It does not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. That is why I have left it undeclared. And what have I declared? I have declared this is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And why have I declared that? Because it is beneficial. It belongs to the fundamentals of the holy life. It leads to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. That is why I have declared it. On another occasion, the Buddha said that the things he has realized are numerous, but the things he has taught are few. This is because he only teaches those things that are of benefit and can be used to solve problems. Specifically, these beneficial things are the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha was once staying in the Simsapa Grove near the city of Kosambi. At that time he picked up a small handful of Nara tree leaves and said to the monks, "What do you estimate, monks, which is more numerous, these few Nara leaves that I hold in my hand, or those in the Simsapa Grove overhead?" "Venerable Sir, the few Nara leaves that the Blessed One holds in his hand are of small amount, while those in the Simsapa Grove overhead are much more numerous." So too, monks, the things I have directly known, but have not taught you are numerous, while the things I have taught you are few. And why, monks, have I not taught those many things? Because they are unbeneficial, irrelevant to the fundamentals of the holy life, and do not lead to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. And what, monks, have I taught? I have taught, this is suffering. I have taught, this is the origin of suffering. I have taught, this is the cessation of suffering. I have taught, this is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. And why have I taught this? Because it is beneficial, relevant to the fundamentals of the holy life, and leads to disenchantment, to dispassion, to cessation, to peace, to direct knowledge, to enlightenment, to nibbana. Therefore I have taught this. Therefore, monks, you should make effort in order to understand according to the truth. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. The Four Noble Truths are a vital teaching for both renunciants and lay people. The Buddha therefore urged the monks to give teachings to the lay people so that they understand these truths. Monks, those whom you ought to give assistance, or those who are receptive to the teachings, whether friends or colleagues, relatives or kinsmen, these you should encourage and exhort to be settled and established in a realization of the Four Noble Truths as they really are. 3. The meaning of the Four Noble Truths. A. These Four Noble Truths, monks, are actual, unerring, and constant. Therefore they are called Noble Truths. B. Monks, the Tathagata is the Noble One in this world with its Devas, Mara and Brahma, in this generation with its ascetics and Brahmins, its Devas and humans. Therefore they are called Noble Truths because they are realized and revealed by the Buddha, the Noble One. C. Monks, it is because he has fully awakened to these Four Noble Truths, as they really are, that the Tathagata, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one, is called the Noble One. Referring to passages in the Pali Canon, the Visuddhimagga presents 4 definitions for the Four Noble Truths. 1. Truths realized by the Noble Ones. See end note. 2. Truths belonging to the Noble One, Pali definition B above. 3. Truths leading to the state of being a Noble One, Pali definition C above. 4. Truths that are actual and certain, Pali definition A above. The canonical explanations for the 4 truths are as follows. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of suffering. Birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, encounters with what is displeasing is suffering, separation from what is pleasing is suffering, not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is craving which leads to renewed existence, accompanied by delight and lust, seeking delight here and there, that is, craving for sensual pleasures, craving for existence, craving for annihilation. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. It is the remainderless elimination and cessation of that same craving, the giving up and relinquishing of it, freedom from it, non-attachment to it. Now this, monks, is the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of suffering. It is the noble eightfold path, that is, right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Further explanations are as follows. 1. Dukkha, suffering, conditions that are difficult to endure, human predicaments. On a more profound level, this truth refers to the state of all conditioned things, which are subject to the natural laws of impermanence, dukkha and non-self. Conditioned phenomena are accompanied by pressure, stress, conflict and obstruction. They are inherently flawed and imperfect. They lack true substance and stability. They are unable to provide lasting satisfaction and contentment. They are constantly prone to cause problems and to create suffering for someone who attaches to them with clinging upadana. 2. Dukkha samudaya, abbreviated as samudaya. The origin or source of suffering, i.e. craving tanha, which seizes onto a belief in self, establishing an I, which is presumed to experience and acquire, exist and cease to exist in different circumstances. Attaching to this sense of self subjects a person to continual agitation, anxiety, yearning, possessiveness, hatred, fear, suspicion, boredom, and other forms of mental affliction. One is thus unable to truly feel at ease, free and joyous. One does not know happiness that is immaculate and secure. 3. Dukkha nirodha, abbreviated as nirodha, the cessation of suffering, the state reached when one completely eliminates ignorance and craving, when one is not influenced or compelled by craving, and when one is not oppressed by anxiety, boredom, or any other form of mental affliction. One is liberated, peaceful, bright, and at ease. One experiences pure happiness. In short, nirodha is equivalent to nibbana. 4. Dukkha nirodha gamini patipada, abbreviated as magga, the path leading to the cessation of suffering, or the mode of practice for reaching the end of suffering, i.e. the noble eightfold path, Arya Atangika Magga, the supreme path consisting of 8 factors, i.e. right view, right concentration. This path is known as the middle way, Majjhima Patipada, because it proceeds in a balanced way to the end of suffering, without getting stuck at or veering towards either of the 2 extremes, indulgence in sensual pleasures, kama sukhali kanu yoga, or self-mortification, atta kila mata nu yoga, practices of self-torment. 4. The Four Noble Truths and Dependent Origination. Dependent origination and the Four Noble Truths are both central Buddhist teachings. In answer to the question, what did the Buddha realize at his enlightenment, it is equally accurate to say that he realized dependent origination and that he realized the Four Noble Truths. There are passages in the Pali Canon to substantiate both of these claims. This is because these two teachings are essentially the same and point to the same truths. Dependent origination is an essential element of the Four Noble Truths, and the Four Noble Truths incorporates dependent origination. Let us look at the scriptural evidence for this assertion. The Vinaya Pitaka describes the story of the Buddha's enlightenment, beginning with the time immediately after his enlightenment, when for an entire week he experienced the bliss of liberation and contemplated dependent origination. Both the forward sequence, the arising of suffering, and the reverse sequence, the cessation of suffering. After 7 weeks of experiencing the bliss of liberation, the Buddha considered proclaiming the Dhamma to others, and he had this thought: this Dhamma that I have attained is profound, difficult to see, difficult to realize. It is difficult for such a generation, delighting in attachment, to see this truth, namely specific conditionality, dependent origination, and it is hard to see this truth, namely Nibbana. The Sutta Pitaka presents a similar description of the Buddha's life story, beginning with the thoughts that led him to go forth and leave the palace, followed by accounts of his going forth as a renunciant, studying with the ascetics Alara and Udaka, undertaking and relinquishing the practices of extreme asceticism, resuming eating food, and then attaining the jhanas and realizing the 3 forms of knowledge at the time of his awakening. Now, when I had eaten solid food and regained my strength, then quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, I entered upon and abided in the first jhana, the second jhana, the third jhana, the fourth jhana, which has neither pleasure nor pain, and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. When my mind was concentrated, purified, bright, unblemished, rid of defilement, malleable, wieldly, steady, and imperturbable, I directed it to knowledge of the recollection of past lives, Be Niwa Sanu Sati Yana, the first knowledge, Vidya. I recollected my manifold past lives. I directed it to knowledge of the passing away and reappearance of beings. I saw beings passing away and reappearing, Kutu Papata Yana, the second knowledge. I directed it to knowledge of the destruction of the taints, Asava Kaya Yana, the third knowledge. I directly knew as it actually is. This is suffering, this is the origin of suffering, this is the cessation of suffering. This is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. I directly knew as it actually is. These are the taints. This is the origin of the taints. This is the cessation of the taints. This is the way leading to the cessation of the taints. When I knew and saw thus, my mind was liberated from the taint of sensual desire, from the taint of becoming, and from the taint of ignorance. Following these passages is a description of the Buddha's considerations on proclaiming the Dhamma identical to the passage in the Vinaya Pitaka quoted above. The Vinaya Pitaka describes the period immediately following the Buddha's awakening, when the Buddha experienced the bliss of liberation, which the commentaries say lasted for 7 weeks. The description begins with the Buddha's review of dependent origination and ends with the Buddha's thoughts on refraining from teaching the Dhamma due to the complexity and profundity of dependent origination and of Nibbana. The Sutta Pitaka describes the circumstances leading up to the Buddha's awakening until he realizes the 3 forms of knowledge, vijja. It passes over the period of experiencing the bliss of liberation and goes directly to the Buddha's inclination to refrain from teaching. Those people who focus on the passages in the Vinaya in which the Buddha contemplates dependent origination, and the passages in both the Vinaya and the Suttas in which the Buddha considers teaching the Dhamma, will claim that the Buddha realized dependent origination. Those people, on the other hand, who focus on the Sutta passages, especially those describing the realization of the 3 forms of knowledge, and who consider primarily the 3rd knowledge, which is the true essence of awakening. The first 2 forms of knowledge cannot be considered equivalent to awakening and are not essential for realizing Nibbana, will claim that the Buddha realized the 4 Noble Truths, resulting in liberation from the taints. Although these 2 answers are both correct, the 2 teachings have different features and a varying scope of application, and thus should be recognized as distinct from one another. In regard to the similarity between these 2 teachings, let us review the 2 distinct cycles of dependent origination and then compare these to the 4 Noble Truths. 1. Cycle of origination, samudaya vara. Ignorance arises, to volitional formations arises, to birth arises, to aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, and despair arise. 2. Cycle of cessation, nirodha vara. Ignorance ceases, to volitional formations cease, birth ceases, to aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, despair cease. A. The origination cycle of dependent origination is equivalent to the 1st and the 2nd Noble Truths, suffering dukkha and suffering's origin samudaya. In the 4 Noble Truths, the final section of dependent origination, birth, aging, death, sorrow, lamentation, etc., which is the result of craving and clinging, is designated as the 1st Noble Truth. It refers to the problems that people encounter and that must be rectified. The teaching then returns to the preceding factors, ignorance to becoming, and designate them as the 2nd Noble Truth, the source of human problems. B. The cessation cycle of dependent origination is equivalent to the 3rd Noble Truth, nirodha. It reveals how problems, when they are properly solved at their root, cease according to the law of cause and effect. Although the cessation cycle is directly associated with the 3rd Noble Truth, it also includes the 4th Noble Truth, because the eradication of problems refers indirectly to the conduct or practice involved in solving these problems. It points to the particular actions required to resolve problems. It is thus possible to condense the Four Noble Truths, resulting in two truths: the existence of suffering, truths 1 and 2, and the end of suffering, truths 3 and 4. In some sutras, these two cycles of dependent origination are used as definitions for the second and third Noble Truths. The origination cycle is a definition for the second truth, and the cessation cycle is a definition for the third. In these definitions, however, only craving tanha is revealed as the cause for suffering, samudaya, and similarly, the end of craving is the definition for cessation, nirodha. This is because craving is the most obvious defilement. It plays a dominant role and is thus highlighted for investigation. Despite this abbreviated presentation, the entire process of dependent origination is implied. The teachings on dependent origination and on the Four Noble Truths are distinct from each other in the following ways. These two teachings reveal the same truth, but in different ways and with different objectives. Dependent origination describes an automatic, natural process. The Four Noble Truths, on the other hand, presents a model for wise inquiry and investigation, leading to practical results. The Four Noble Truths corresponds to the Buddha's own search for truth, beginning with his encounters with suffering and his consequent search for its cause. He discovered that this search is not in vain. There is indeed a solution. He thus determined the specific points which need to be attended to and set himself a clear goal. Finally, he carried out the necessary measures to solve the problem until he reached his desired goal. The Four Noble Truths is thus used as a systemized teaching for generating understanding, profiting both the person who presents the teaching and the person who receives it. Dependent origination is the essential dynamic inherent in the Four Noble Truths, which the Buddha contemplated immediately after his awakening. It is the key teaching which a person must study in order to understand the gist of the Four Noble Truths. The main distinction between these teachings is found in relation to the cessation cycle of dependent origination, which corresponds to the third and fourth Noble Truth. When one compares the cessation cycle with the third Noble Truth, nirodha, one sees that it focuses primarily on the process leading to cessation rather than on the state of cessation, nibbana itself. For this reason, following the Buddha's awakening, while he was considering whether to teach the Dhamma, he distinguished the two truths that he had realized. His first consideration was, this Dhamma that I have attained is profound, difficult to see, difficult to realize. It is difficult for such a generation delighting in attachment to see this truth, namely specific conditionality, dependent origination. This was followed by a second consideration, and it is hard to see the truth, namely the stilling of all formations, the abandonment of all foundations for suffering, the end of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. The third Noble Truth, on the other hand, refers principally to the state of cessation, although the process leading to cessation is inherent in it. The cessation cycle of dependent origination incorporates the Fourth Noble Truth, Marga, but it does not clearly mark out a path of practice. It does not clearly specify the details or methods of practical application, what needs to be done for the process to reach completion. This is similar to a doctor who knows how to treat an illness, but neither prescribes medicine nor sets down a treatment plan. In the Four Noble Truths, however, the Buddha specifically distinguished the Fourth Truth for the purpose of practical application. It is a way of practice that has been tested and proved, and leads with certainty to the goal of complete and utter freedom. The Fourth Noble Truth, Magga, describes spiritual practice in a detailed, balanced, and comprehensive way. It comprises the entire Buddhist system of practice. It is called the middle way of practice, or the middle way, which is to be undertaken by people in order to generate results within themselves. Dependent origination, on the other hand, is referred to as an impartial teaching of truth, Majjena Dhammang Desati, or a middle teaching which accords with the inherent laws of nature. It encompasses the first three noble truths because the middle way, Magga, has distinctive features. It is important to distinguish it as a unique teaching. In sum, the Buddha made a distinction between the truths that he realized at the time of his awakening. On the one hand, there is dependent origination and nibbana, and on the other hand, the Four Noble Truths. All of these truths are essentially the same, but viewed from different perspectives. The Buddha referred to dependent origination and nibbana when he was considering whether to teach the Dhamma, acknowledging how profound these things are and how difficult it is for beings to understand them. Nibbana and dependent origination are the essential qualities realized by the Buddha at the time of his enlightenment. They are the true and pure essence of the Dhamma, extremely difficult to realize, and they lie at the heart of the teaching on the Four Noble Truths. The Buddha referred to the Four Noble Truths when he described his own practice culminating in his awakening, and when he gave teachings to others, beginning with the first sermon on setting the wheel of Dhamma in motion. The Four Noble Truths comprise the entire range of truths realized by the Buddha. They are organized into a gradual system of coherent and effective teachings which take into account people's ability to understand these truths and to apply them to their lives. Nibbana and dependent origination are pure natural phenomena. The Four Noble Truths are those matters directly pertaining to human beings. They are presented in a way that is conducive to understanding and to practical application. The Four Noble Truths embody the entirety of the truth Dhamma, whereas the essential and the most difficult to realize qualities of these teachings are Nibbana and dependent origination. A person who truly understands Nibbana and dependent origination understands Buddha Dhamma in its entirety, including the Four Noble Truths.